if you develop a rotation, say this flat's got 6 or 8 key pieces of cover in it, you go back in there and you rotate through that cover, eventually you're going to get your timing right to where the ball of bait's going to pull up there the same time you pull up there, and you're going to catch 2 or 3 really quick. They're not going to be on every piece of cover, but if it's got 4, 5, 6 isolated pieces of cover, figure out where those key pieces are, and then just kind of work a rotation through those places, and you're going to end up bouncing up to one of them at just the right time and be able to catch some fish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the Technique of the Month video for October. We appreciate y'all watching and always engaging with these videos. It certainly we certainly appreciate that and enjoy it, and more than anything, we just hope that you all are learning something from them and able to take that out on the water and able to catch some fish with it. I love reading your comments and stuff and saying, hey, I took this technique and took it out on my local lake and caught some fish on what you said, and that's why we do this. That's what we like to hear, and want to make your time on the water more enjoyable. For October, something that I feel like usually starts happening across a lot of the country, could already have been happening in some other places, but something I certainly see around here a lot is, you know, that those bait fish really getting balled up, and a lot of that being in shallow water. And it could be the bait fish could be up near the top, but they're out over deep water. So you'll see, you end up seeing a lot of fish suspended, I feel like, this time of the year, but you definitely see those, literally see with your eyes, those bait balls really forming and really coming up, you know, to the surface, and then can see a lot of activity around those, a lot of fish feeding on them and that kind of stuff. Seems like when that bait really gets clustered up like that, that it makes for an easy thing for bass to want to, you know, to try to ambush them and to try to take advantage of that situation. It's not quite as good as a shad spawn, but it can be a very, very productive way to fish. You know, we're as anglers, we're way more proficient at it now, regardless of the time of the year, with forward-facing sonar, being able to see bait balls at any depth. But this truly, to me, is a time of the year where we were able to see that, you know, in a lot of our fishing anyway, because those bait balls literally were up on the surface where they were always visible to us. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, of those ones that, you know, truly are more visible up near the surface, and some ways that you can target fish around those. And it's funny because you think of, you know, that being a, you know, happens a lot on the surface. It happens up in the top part of the water column, and just what the general book says on bass fishing is that most of the, you know, surface fishing is best at low light conditions, you know, especially first thing in the morning. That typically is not the case with this type of fishing. You know, usually in the fall, you're starting to have some cool fronts, some little bit cooler nights and that kind of stuff, and that'll knock that surface temperature back a little bit. And a lot of times this doesn't get going until you get up in the day and that surface temperature has warmed up just a little bit more, kind of warmed back up a little bit. And that's when those bait fish will actually start coming up onto the surface. So, you know, if you're out there practicing and you're fishing them before the tournament, you know, a couple days, and man, it gets up to 11 or 12 o'clock and you start seeing all this bait in these areas and fish popping on them and that kind of stuff and catching fish. Well, you take off tournament morning, you run right back in that area, and it seems dead. Like you're not seeing any bait fish on the surface, you're not seeing any fish feed. It's a timing thing. It happens a lot in the fall, where that, especially if you have those cooler nights, the timing of it ends up being mid-morning, you know, noon kind of thing, or even up into the afternoon once it's already warmed up a little bit. So don't get too discouraged if you get on that bite, you see it happening, you get back out there first thing in the morning, and it's like, it's non-existent. It really is, so much of that ends up being a timing deal. I think those fish probably stay with them in some capacity, but I don't think that they really feed that heavily, in my opinion, until the sun gets up, until that bait gets up near the surface. Because again, that surface of the water, that is their best ambush point if they're not around some type of cover. So once that bait gets up near the surface, that's truly when those bass are like, okay, now it's time. The bait's where we want it to be. It's where we can feed on it the best, and now we're going to make them pay. So you know, some of the places that I think of this happening a lot, you know, I think of like some bigger bays, not way back in the back of a creek where we fished in August and September, but you come back out into those kind of flats, into those bays, and anywhere from, you know, really, really shallow water out over 8 or 10 feet deep, in my opinion, is the kind of places where you'll see this take place. And you'll watch those balls of bait, and man, they might be moving around and the fish occasionally feeding in them. But if that ball of bait typically intercepts a piece of cover, that's when stuff really starts happening. If it gets up near a boat dock, if it gets near a lay down log, if it gets near, you know, some grass or something like that, when you get that intersection of bait and cover, that truly is where those fish really tend to feed. And so if I'm not, you know, not throwing out an active feeding fish, what I'm looking for, I'll get in those areas and I'll just visibly look for, or use my 360 or side imaging to look for pieces of cover, the kind of places where I know it's going to be an ambush point when that bait gets close to it. And I'll try to, you know, really key in on those areas in between when I'm actually, you know, seeing fish feed and trying to follow active fish. Because if you develop a rotation, say this flat's got 6 or 8 key pieces of cover in it, you go back in there and you rotate through that cover, eventually you're going to get your timing right to where the ball of bait's going to pull up there the same time you pull up there, and you're going to catch 2 or 3 really quick. So that's the kind of thing that you want to try to do, is to figure out where the fish are going to be. They're not going to be on every piece of cover, but if it's got 4, 5, 6 isolated pieces of cover, figure out where those key pieces are, and then just kind of work a rotation through those places, and you're going to end up bouncing up to one of them at just the right time and be able to catch some fish. So bait wise, you know, for me, I'm going to make it bait fish oriented. Obviously, I think that certainly kind of makes kind of sense, and really got three different kinds of baits here, and it's all about matching those fish's mood. You know, trying to figure out what those fish are going to react to, and what you can fish in and around that cover, or if those fish are out more in open water. But it truly, a lot of it has to do with what those fish will react and actually feed on. You know, clearer water, obviously you're going to want more natural baits and stuff that you can fish really fast. If the water's got a little bit more color to it, you can get away with a little bit more aggressive baits or something. But when I think of it this time of the year, I'm not thinking of a very dirty water. You know, if it's got 1.5 feet of visibility, that would be pretty dirty water, in my opinion, for most of this kind of application. But you know, trying to make that bait somewhat erratic is really, really key, in my opinion, this time of the year. When you've got that ball of bait that's kind of all doing the same thing, those bass are looking for one that's doing something a little different. And if you watch a school of them, they're usually going to, you know, hit those ones that seem to be acting a little different or swimming a little funny or whatever it may be. And that's certainly what you want to try to imitate with your bait. So first up, one that's, you know, obviously had plenty of press as of lately, you know, jig head minnow type bait, fishing this thing just probably on a little bit lighter head, honestly, a 3/16 ounce, something pretty light, because again, we're fishing it up near the surface of the water. And this is even a good time of year to take a soft jerk bait and just rig it on a wide gap hook, you know, because that is a really erratic way to fish it. And you can throw it right in those balls of bait. So don't think that you have to have that just on a jig head, just because that's how so many people are fishing anymore. I mean, remember, we used to fish this bait way back in the day. We used to fish this bait with a wide gap hook in it and twitch it weightless. That's still a very, very effective way to fish it right now. That's the Bass Pro Shady Shad. It's a really good soft jerk bait. I've caught a ton of fish on it. But yeah, either fishing that on a jig head or on just a wide gap hook weightless is a really good way to fish that in those balls of bait. And you can go from just slightly erratic with this, with the way that you shake it and work it with the rod tip, versus really, really erratic, rigging it on that wide gap hook and fishing it weightless. You can make it really erratic that way. Next up would be a jerk bait. You know, I feel like this is probably my favorite one for more open water type applications. If those fish are not really around a lot of cover, maybe the wind has kind of blown some bait back into the back of a pocket or something, a jerk bait is certainly the one that is going to get the nod for that. And again, most of this, we're talking about stuff that they're feeding up pretty high in the water column. So that's just the regular Maverick. You know, this bait will run maybe 5 or 6 feet deep if you try to get it down that far. And in a natural, you know, very translucent shad type pattern. I really like those, you know, more translucent colors this time of the year when those fish are you know, keyed in on that bait. Big thing with that jerk bait is sometimes you just cannot fish it too fast. I mean, no pauses whatsoever. Really working the snot out of that bait, trying to get a reaction bite out of those fish is really, really important with that jerk bait this time of the year. And last up, be a little crankbait. That's the little OG Tiny. That bait this time of the year, so it's about the same size as most of the bait fish you're going to encounter out there on the water. And if you've got a little bit of wood cover, a little bit of rock or something around, that bait's going to deflect off of that pretty well and be able to generate some bites. And that's one that obviously more colored water, that's going to be the one that I go to. You know, a little bit of vibration that it puts off is something those fish are able to pick up on, but still something you could fish in those areas. And this is a bait, I don't burn this bait like I will a square bill. You know, I don't fish it super, super fast, but this is a time of the year when I'll fish it as fast as I possibly can. And you know, get that bait down there and really try to just get those fish to react to it, especially in a little bit more open situations. If it's in cover, you can't really burn that bait in cover, but you can on gravel or rock or just mud flats, something like that. You could fish that bait pretty quick and be able to generate bites that way. So, you know, those 3 baits are going to imitate, you know, pretty much any way that you're wanting to try to catch those fish that are relating to those bait balls. For the jig head minnow, not if I was fishing this on a wide gap hook, but for the jig head minnow, Carbon Light 6.9 medium light action, Carbon Light spinning reel. That's 10-pound XPS braid. And then I'm typically going to fish that on an 8-pound XPS fluorocarbon leader. If I was fishing that, you know, with a wide gap hook and rigged where it would be a little bit weedless, I would probably have it on the 7.1 Platinum medium action and a 10 or 12-pound fluorocarbon leader at that point, just to have a little bit more meat in the rod. This is a great rod though for it with that exposed hook. And I like that 6.9, a little bit shorter, and that soft medium light, just really able to impart that action on it really well. For the jerkbait, a 6.6 Carbon Light medium action rod there, and then I've got a Platinum reel on here, 6/8 to 1 gear ratio, and 12-pound test XPS fluorocarbon line, 6.6. That's what I fish all my jerkbaits on. A little bit shorter. You know, you're working that rod down towards the water, and don't want to be hitting the boat or hitting the water when you're working that. Didn't lay the other crank and stick out here, but if you've ever watched anything I've ever talked about a crankbait, I've talked about a Bass Pro crank and stick a lot. 7-foot medium heavy action, 6/8 to 1, same reel as that jerkbait and the Platinum, and usually 12-pound test with Tiny. I will fish it on 14 on occasion, especially if I'm heavier cover, bigger fish, that kind of thing. But 12 or 14-pound XPS fluorocarbon line there with Tiny on that 7-foot medium heavy crank and stick is my all-time favorite crankbait setup. And you'll actually hear more about that crankbait setup next month. So, but no, October can be a cool time. Definitely look for those bait fish. Get out there, try to find those areas where that bait is balled up and those fish are taking advantage of it. It's not quite the same as the shad spawn, but kind of similar in some ways, definitely. Just be expecting those fish to move around a little bit more and be a little bit more mobile. Don't think that, you know, just this one place right here is the only place you're going to catch one. You've just got to kind of mill around and kind of like we talked about last month, of you find a productive place, be sure you visit that place again multiple times throughout the day, because timing is really, really important this time of the year. Once you get a little bit later in the fall, those fish they can turn on in a minute, they can turn off in a minute, but you've got to be there when they're doing that. So thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.